Imagine sitting down to play an RPG, excited by the promise of shaping your own adventure. You're given dialogue options, branching paths, and decisions that seem to matter. Yet as the story unfolds, you start to notice a pattern. No matter what you choose, the outcome feels predetermined. That creeping sense of being guided down a single track, even when the game insists you're free, is what players often call railroading. It's a moment when choice stops feeling like agency and starts feeling like illusion. So then, what does railroading even mean, and why is it so frustrating? Railroading in RPGs refers to the practice of guiding players down a predetermined path, often regardless of the choices they make. On the surface, the game may present branching dialogue or multiple options, but behind the scenes, the outcome is already fixed. This can be subtle, a quest that always ends the same way, or a decision that changes only minor details, yet the effect is powerful. Players quickly realize their agency is limited, and that supposed freedom is more illusion than reality. The frustration comes from the disconnect between expectation and experience. RPGs promise choice, but railroading strips away the sense of ownership over the story. Instead of shaping the adventure, players feel like passengers on a track, watching events unfold without true influence. Understanding railroading as a definition is one thing, but seeing how it plays out in practice makes the issue far clearer. To explore this, let's look at 5 notable examples when railroading stood out and sparked lasting debate. Mass Effect 3 2012. For years, BioWare built anticipation around the idea that every choice across the trilogy would shape Shepard's fate. Players invested in moral dilemmas, squad loyalty, and branching romances, expecting a payoff that reflected their unique journey. When the finale reduced all paths to nearly 3 identical outcomes, the illusion shattered. The moment fans realized their decisions had little weight was devastating, sparking forums, memes, and even organized petitions. BioWare's extended cut added explanatory cutscenes, but the core convergence remained. The controversy became a textbook example of how railroading erodes trust in long-form RPG storytelling. Final Fantasy XIII 2009. Square Enix's 13th entry leaned heavily into cinematic presentation, but at the cost of player freedom. The game's structure forced progression through narrow corridors, with battles and cutscenes unfolding in a fixed order. Audiences noticed early on that exploration was absent, and the hallway simulator nickname stuck. What stood out most was the disconnect between the franchise's reputation for sprawling worlds and 13's rigid design. Community frustration was loud enough that sequels shifted direction. 13-2 introduced branching timelines and alternate endings, with a clear attempt to restore agency after criticism of the original's railroading. Telltale's The Walking Dead 2012. The episodic format promised weighty decisions: who to save, who to side with, how to shape Lee's relationship with Clementine. Yet players soon realized that major story beats always funneled back to the same outcome. The illusion broke when supposedly life or death choices failed to alter the overarching narrative, leaving only cosmetic differences. Community feedback was mixed. Many praised the emotional resonance, but others felt betrayed by the lack of true divergence. Telltale acknowledged the tension, experimenting with broader branching in later series like The Wolf Among Us, though railroading remained a hallmark of their design philosophy. Dragon Age 2 2011. BioWare's sequel shifted to a tighter, city-focused narrative, but in doing so forced Hawke into conflicts that unfolded the same way regardless of player input. Attempts at diplomacy or neutrality were overridden by scripted faction clashes, making agency feel hollow. Fans noticed the illusion when rival groups inevitably fought, no matter how carefully they tried to mediate. The reuse of environments amplified the sense of restriction. Community criticism was sharp, and BioWare responded by promising more expansive choice in Dragon Age Inquisition. That follow-up delivered broader branching paths, showing the studio had absorbed lessons from 2's railroading backlash. Cyberpunk 2077-2020. Marketed as a sandbox of freedom, Cyberpunk often funneled quests into fixed outcomes, with endings tied to a handful of late-game decisions. Players noticed that side quest choices, even those with emotional weight, barely touched the main storyline. The disconnect between marketing promises and actual agency stood out immediately. Community frustration was compounded by technical issues, and while patches improved stability, narrative railroading remained. CD Projekt Red partially addressed this with Phantom Liberty, which offered more divergent paths and endings, signaling that feedback had influenced the approach, though the base game structure remained largely unchanged. Looking at these examples, it's clear that railroading can take many forms, from endings that collapse into sameness, to worlds that restrict exploration, to dialogue that only pretends to matter. Each case shows how quickly players notice when agency slips away, and how strongly communities respond when promised freedom feels hollow. Yet for every misstep, there are RPGs that manage to deliver choice in ways that felt authentic and lasting. By pairing these flawed titles with games that succeeded, we can see not only what went wrong, but also how meaningful design restores trust and immersion. Where Mass Effect 3 collapsed years of decisions into near-identical endings, The Witcher 3 offered branching quests with consequences that rippled across the world. Players noticed their choices reshaped kingdoms, relationships, and even the fate of Geralt's adopted daughter. The contrast highlights how agency feels authentic when outcomes diverge significantly, not cosmetically. Final Fantasy XIII's rigid corridor design stripped away exploration, while Final Fantasy VII Remake balanced cinematic storytelling with player-driven combat and optional content. Fans praised how side quests and dialogue choices added texture without derailing the main narrative. The lesson? Linearity can coexist with meaningful agency if players feel the input shapes the journey. Telltale's choices often funneled back to the same beats, but Detroit Become Human built a branching structure where decisions led to radically different endings. Players noticed how small changes, sparing a character, choosing diplomacy, cascaded into unique storylines. Community feedback was overwhelmingly positive, proving that narrative games thrive when paths truly diverge. Dragon Age 2 forced Hawk into inevitable faction clashes, but Inquisition broadened the scope with multiple regions, alliances, and outcomes. Players saw their decisions influence political power, companion loyalty, and even the game's ending. BioWare's shift showed how listening to criticism can restore trust. Railroading gave way to genuine branching. Cyberpunk's quests often funneled into fixed outcomes, but Baldur's Gate 3 embraced tabletop-style freedom. Players noticed how nearly every choice, from dialogue to combat tactics, could alter storylines, companions, and endings. Community praise centered on the sense of ownership, proving that modern RPGs can deliver true agency when design prioritizes flexibility. Railroading reminds us that choice is the lifeblood of RPGs. When decisions collapse into sameness, players feel more like passengers than storytellers, and trust in the experience begins to erode. Yet the contrasting examples show that meaningful agency is possible when developers design with flexibility, listen to feedback, and allow outcomes to diverge in ways that feel earned. The lesson is simple but powerful. Freedom doesn't have to mean chaos, but it does have to feel real. And that leaves us with the question worth pondering. When you play an RPG, do you value the story the developers want to tell, or the freedom to shape your own? And which matters more to you in the end? Thanks guys for watching, and as always, stay safe everyone. Bye for now.